Today, we are going to do a walkthrough, kind of a fun little walkthrough on cybercrime on the dark web. And dark web is always a rather juicy topic that generates lots of interest and lots of questions. So excited to get into it today. We are again joined by Earl, a wonderful colleague, and I call him a friend. Hopefully, he feels the same way. Uh, one of the cyber specialists on our team that's going to be walking us through the meat of the presentation today. My name is Libby Robinson, and I lead up the product marketing team here. So all this messaging stuff is fun for me. So getting into what it is that we're going to cover today, we're going to go through what is the dark web. And so that what is section kind of includes what it is, who uses it, what type of information is available on the dark web. We'll get into what the baddies are doing on there, and a little bit of a talk about what certain ways that the good guys are trying to intervene as well. And then finally, we'll cover some tips and tricks and solutions and help and stuff to protect yourself from the dark web. So getting into what it is, and one of the analogies actually, Earl, that one of our guys here used for me that I found really impactful, because they were sort of like, well, why does it even exist, right? And it was really interesting. He was kind of walking through look, whether you're on the good side or the bad side, there are people have their skill sets, right? And so there are people that are good at getting the data, but they're not maybe as good as monetizing it, right? So there are other people that aren't so good at getting it, but they really know what to do with it once they have it. So enter the dark web, which is really this marketplace that brings skills together, just skills of sort of the underbelly. So how about you walk us through some of the what is it and its characteristics?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Libby. Yeah, so like Libby said, the dark web, we're going to talk about it largely through the lens of a cybersecurity professional. There's certainly more to it than just cybersecurity, but that will be the primary lens through which we talk about it here. And we're going to first kind of get ourselves situated by capturing a little bit of insight into what is the dark web versus other terms you might have heard of, like the deep web, as an example. Pardon me, as an example, and then take a look at some of the features and those sorts of things of the dark web. So right off the bat, it's fair to say so first of all, it runs over the exact same global telecommunications network as the rest of the internet, but it is protected in certain ways or accessible through certain technologies is kind of key here. It is rough around the edges, it's fair to say. It resembles a lot of the internet that you might have experienced in the early days of the internet in terms of web hosting standards and those sorts of things. Key as well to what we call the dark web is that it is largely quite transient, meaning that not only the data that is on the dark web, but the sites themselves and the users come and go with great regularity. And we'll see some examples of that, particularly through the lens of cybersecurity and some of the groups in that domain that take advantage of the dark web. It's certainly useful for privacy and security from a whole bunch of perspectives. We'll talk about that a little bit as well. And of course, it's filled with all kinds of crazy things, basically. It is the wildest west that the internet has to offer is kind of an apt metaphor for it. A key kind of this definition piece around what we're talking about here is that the bulk of what is commonly known as the dark web largely exists on Tor or the Onion router and its encrypted network. There are other technologies, and we're going to take a little peek at some of those and just kind of give you a sense of what it means to move from the surface web down into the dark web on our next slide.
Yeah, and before you move there, the like the internet of the 90s, always it made me smile, because there is sort of a weird pride, I guess, on the look and feel of it, like it not being all sort of modern and fancy. Like it's just I don't know, it almost gives it a feel of more rugged, and I think that's sort of they kind of are. It's sort of like a sense of pride on that from that perspective,
It,
isn't it?
Yeah, there's a definitely like well, there's a certain utilitarian
Yeah,
vibe to a lot of what goes on there. There are a lot of technical limitations with regard to web hosting and things that make it difficult. But the temporary nature of a lot of the websites also makes them, a little rough around the edges.
yeah, fair enough. It's more substance than style.
Yeah, that's right. Um, yeah, this illustration is one that I wanted to share, and I've shared it many times with people. I think it's a useful visual illustration of kind of what we're talking about. And as IT professionals, it's useful to have kind of the separation in mind. Basically, the internet that most of us know and live, in and on, so to speak, is what we would refer to as the surface web, kind of the bulk of the internet that we experience day to day when we're doing our searches on Google or Bing or wherever they are, visiting websites that we frequent, news and those sorts of things. And that's generally described as the surface web in simple terms. Kind of a layer beneath that is what we might call the deep web. And basically, the difference between these layers very simply has to do with the difficulty of accessing the data, navigating the data, and those sorts of things. And when I say difficulty, it means a few things. Like there's a certain degree of tooling that's required as we move down into the dark web, speaking specifically about the Tor browser. But at this deep web layer, you'll see here some examples of websites that may or may not be indexed well from a search engine perspective, but that might be rich sources of information in a whole bunch of different contexts, cybersecurity and otherwise. Pastebin is a great example of that, which in years past was a frequent hub for data dumps in the way that we often talk about data dumps or data leaks now in the context of the dark web. But there is information very similar to that on that deep web layer. And then really now what we're talking about today, the dark web, riding beneath this, so to speak, is really no different, like we said, than the regular internet, but is wrapped in a protocol or sets of protocols, depending on the technology that you're using. That is the way that you access it. Tor, in particular, is generally speaking, when most people talk about the dark web, that is generally what they're talking about. There are other dark web technologies or environments, depending on the lingo you choose to use. A Telegram is one of my favorite ones these days to bring up because it's used a great deal among cyber criminals as a communications platform and indeed to facilitate financial transactions as well. But Telegram does not run on the Tor network. It is a different technology, but falls into the same category of dark web, meaning it is protected. You usually need a significant degree of know-how, accounts or related sets of access to gain entry into these places. And anyway, the iceberg metaphor kind of suits what we're describing here.
Before we move on, I made a big joke before we started about how Rachel so politely reminded me to sort of go through a little bit of logistics and how to ask questions. And I made a big joke about it, and then I forgot to do it again. So I'm going to pause here and just so this webinar is being recorded. We'll send out the recording after the fact. Please do in the Q&A section, if you have any questions that come up throughout, pile them in there, and we'll go through those. We'll go through those live at the end. I'm sorry, Rachel, that I forgot again, especially how sassy I was being about my jokes leading up to this. So there we go. It's done. We can move on. And I think actually, Earl, you kind of covered these. You covered these sort of next two animations already.
Perfect.
So we'll move on to the next diagram that you're pretty excited about, going through who uses the dark web.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're talking about here is it's kind of a pet topic of mine, a great deal of interest in it, and kind of underpinning a lot of what we're talking about in the early days, largely around Tor and its evolution. It flows out of research actually done by the U.S. Naval Department or division. And since then has evolved obviously tremendously, and is now subsidized by the US government and a bunch of NGOs. But the illustration that you see here on screen captures just a split second of live Tor flow activity. Tor's website maintains a tremendous amount of research material and metrics that captures a view of the Tor network as it's active on the internet. What you can see here is just a quick snapshot of that. What I wanted to show in this context primarily was the geography that you see in play here. So you can see Europe, big time, North America, obviously the United States primarily, but there is global traffic. China, very, very tiny, protected, of course, by their firewall. Other geographies, you will see some differences there. But the types of users that we see on Tor or on the dark web, broadly speaking, they run the gamut from the list you see here. So privacy seekers of all sorts take advantage of dark web technologies like Tor to obfuscate to their web browsing and other things, to share information as well, journalists as well. In fact, a lot of big publications, CNN, many others, they actually have sites on the dark web, .onion websites that are intended for whistleblowers to upload, securely data to them. So anyway, journalists, researchers, like I have mentioned as well, and what we're here to talk about primarily today, of course, are cyber criminals who have come to use the dark web prolifically and to tremendous success.
It's
And we'll see as
interesting because we
well
do.
old-timey criminals as well. Sorry, Libby. Yes, there
That's
is
okay.
a huge trade in all kinds of illicit goods on the dark web, in addition to cybercrime, of course.
Yeah, it is interesting to think because we do tend to think the dark web bad. Everything in the dark web is bad, and it's always interesting to know how much sort of legitimate stuff there is as well. But as you say, we're gonna dive into the bad a little bit.
Yes,
And sorry, you also had this extra diagram here that you really
yes.
reminds me of
This one,
go back to play the
yeah,
piano.
yeah, no, this is a great one. This one is actually just meant to capture, again, this is just reflective of kind of the research community and research data, frankly, that is available behind Tor specifically. And you can see here metrics around the Tor browser's update patterns, which gives you a little bit of insight into like daily usage of the Tor browser, and therefore some insight into general usage of the Tor network. And the graphs here, don't worry about the details on them. The key takeaway is two things. One, the level of research and insight into Tor is really quite something. But two, and for us as IT professionals, it's alive and well. There are, nearing 1 million update pings for Tor browsers every day. So it's a lively community out there.
All right. So what is using the dark web? You sort of walked us through. It's a different kind of architecture and fairly transient. So how do people actually use it?
Yeah, so the key thing about the dark web and why it matters to us as cybersecurity professionals is that it's intended to provide a degree of privacy protection, and a degree of anonymity, quite frankly. So getting around on the dark web is difficult as a byproduct of that. So many of you perhaps have already heard of .onion, the domain TLD associated with Tor. You right now you would be used to visiting fieldeffect.com. It would be some crazy long string .onion. Those are the URLs in the context of Tor. And so search engines are very limited in their capacity to be useful on the dark web. And so we rely on a bunch of other kind of information spaces. Crawling services and researchers are one area, and there are some commercial vendors who operate in this space. But there are lots of link directories that are maintained by users and updated with a pretty significant degree of regularity. The examples we plucked here are kind of the big ticket items that you would hear about or see in the news if you're, watching a media coverage of something happening on the dark web. The hidden wiki is perhaps the most common primary. I don't want to say gateway because the gateway is the Tor browser, but the primary directory of places to begin looking around. But there are many others. And in fact, the surface web, so back on the top of our iceberg, Reddit, and there are a bunch of other surface websites that maintain some insight into communities of interest. on the dark web. So the bottom line here is that using the dark web in the context of Tor specifically requires a dedicated browser, the Tor browser, and then knowledge of how to navigate, right? So a starting point with something like the Hidden Wiki or a set of bookmarks that you might have already leveraged or been given. And then from there, you can begin exploring. But it's tricky to find a starting position initially.
And these linked directories and stuff, are they kept up to date as websites come and go? And is it like who's managing the directories? Who's updating them?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag, frankly. Some of them are purely manual endeavors where site owners are bringing their URLs to the directory and publishing them themselves. Others have built some directories based on some crawling technologies, but it is really hit and miss. One thing you will see if you do spend some time trying to nose around on the dark web is a great deal of the repetition of information. A lot of these directories or link indexes are simply reformats of ones that exist elsewhere on the dark web. And there are many, many, many of them. Some commercial providers have some interesting services related to it that requires a whole other degree of work and effort, which we'll bump into as well.
Okay, so what's the kind of stuff that we find once we've figured out how to navigate, once we've figured out where to go? What's the kind of stuff that we find there?
Yeah, so basically, the dark web is, I don't want to say just like the surface web, because it's definitely not just like the surface web, but there's a large degree of similarity in the types of services that you would expect to find on the open or surface internet. If you were managing a website or trying to run a store, as an example, you will find corollaries of those on the dark web. The ones that us as IT professionals are frequently the most consumed by are the markets and the paste or dump or leak sites, as they're sometimes called. But there's a whole bunch of other things going on there as well. Um, I always sound like a defender of the dark web here, but I like to point out that there are lots of different communities out there as well. Two examples that I have here on the bottom, beneath VT and the comic book library, are kind of fun examples. Comic book library speaks for itself. But the VT site is Virginia Tech, where there's a bunch of effort to maintain maps of the steam tunnels beneath the university. And that is on a Tor website, which I think is kind of neat. Anyway, and so on Tor, you will find a multitude of different communities of, varying sorts. Right. Now, this is where we're going to begin to build the link to what we're about to talk about next, which relates specifically to cybercrime and impacts on us as IT professionals. But as you know, there is a great deal of work done on the dark web to facilitate the business of cybercrime, as Libby mentioned at the beginning. In fact, there's kind of a rich ecosystem of trades at play, and that can be leveraged in the context of some of these dark web communities. Now, it all begins with IT services of the sort you would expect: email, web hosting, etc. All of these things are available on the dark web in different fashions, and whether they bridge the gap or not is a different story. But there are many, many services that deliver IT features to users of the dark web. Financial services are a whole other category, closely related but separate, that again link very often to cybercrime. Bitcoin, any cryptocurrency, frankly, Bitcoin, Monero, etc. These are the currency of trade on the dark web. You'll see here mention of a couple of financial services as examples. These are meant to kind of reflect how I guess the nature of business on the dark web, frankly. So crypto coin tumbling mentioned specifically here as a method of obfuscating how much money one has and where it is moving. Those sorts of things are found on the dark web easily. Escrow services, of course. Trust is a hot commodity on the dark web. And so escrow, of course, makes a great deal of sense and is offered all over the place in these markets, and money transfers, of course, of many different sorts. And there are many other services out there on the dark web as well.
Yeah, I remember actually one of your colleagues sort of saying that that crypto was one of the drivers for kind of a boom in cybercrime, right? Just with the ability to sort of anonymously transfer funds, and it really was, it's not certainly not all bad, but it did sort of open up that ability to more easily transfer funds with anonymously.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a really good background of what it is, how we navigate it, what we find there. So moving on now to the sort of focus on the cybersecurity side. Like walk us through the cybercrime, and how that works, and how the dark web is being used for that.
Yes. Okay. Absolutely. This is kind of my favorite topic these days. And it is it's important to keep in mind that the work of a cyber criminal, like it sounds noble or something, doesn't just take place, of course, on the dark web. All tools available are used. In the context of the dark web, we see kind of a suite of communities evolve largely around these things. Markets meant for the exchange of data primarily, but occasionally access and access brokers are a big part of these communities. Services that relate both to accessing or compromising a victim or target directly, but also services that relate to things like, well, one of the examples here, denial of service attacks, as well as the trade in tools, malware, exploits, all of these sorts of things take place in the context of markets and hacking services. A lot of these blend together, quite frankly. Um, Hacking communities are another big part of a lot of actually what I would say maybe started to build the volume of users in the context of the dark web, was that you could come in there and you could find a community, a forum, frankly, is what I'm talking about, and ask questions. You could learn about whatever it is that interested you. And in the context of cybersecurity, we're talking, about hacker forums and those kinds of things. And a great deal of expertise is actually transferred in these communities, as well as the technology and, of course, the data as well. A key part of cybercrime on the dark web is reputational. And that's where you'll see a break between what might have been in the past kind of referred to loosely as things like script kiddies and light sort of hacker types versus ransomware gangs or more sophisticated networks of cyber criminal operations, wherein there's an ecosystem at play from an access broker through to an exploit developer and everyone in between, all the way through to like APT, advanced persistent threat style actors, which are largely like involved in like nation state style activity. All of that is kind of at play in this context. In these communities, you see everything kind of up to that APT space kind of, at play, and a great deal of interaction in these communities involved around reputation building, like the bragging about things, the sharing of exploits and that kind of stuff, and attempts to recruit and organize others. That happens, and you'll see this a lot in the media, particularly in the last few years. We've seen examples of it. A lot of what we call hacktivism these days is organized. Well, it used to be organized on Tor quite regularly, but now, frankly, Telegram and even Twitter and other places on the surface web suit the bill. But a lot of hacktivism has been organized and executed by way of these sorts of communities. Venezuela, others in recent news, of course, given everything going on in Ukraine and the Middle East, hacking communities, hacktivist communities, politically motivated hackers are more active than they've probably been ever. Just anecdotally, very quickly, I can tell you as an example, nosing around on many of the dark web sites that one does, you'll see a high degree of political side choosing on the dark web these days, whether it might be pro-Russia, pro-Ukraine as simple examples. It is a highly political environment in the context of a lot of these hacking communities.
Hmm.
All that to say, if you're an organization who does business in certain geographies, this might be a thing that might be on your mind, or could be something to be aware of, even if it's just in the context of having remote workers who travel, very simply.
Okay, so I mean, if we know that cybercrime is happening on the dark web, surely there are organizations and people out there that are trying to get ahead of it. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. This is, I think, something that's come quite a long way and made news, certainly in the last, I don't know, Well, it's been going on for quite a long time if you're paying attention, but for many people, this is the sort of thing that might be making the news just in the last few years or getting on your radar from a news perspective. But yes, international law enforcement is very active on what we call the dark web for all kinds of reasons, cybercrime being the biggest one, obviously. And it is quite common, in fact, for both marketplaces as well as the forums or like operating sites of certain cyber criminal groups to be taken down, seized, different phrasing there, by law enforcement. The examples we grabbed here to share,
Mhm.
I think, are some fun ones. The bottom one is actually where we'll begin. Ragnar Locker made tons of news over the last few years. Ransomware gang that ran rampant, causing who knows how many millions and millions and millions of dollars of damage. And here, primary site, it was seized. Can't remember the exact date, but just what I wanted to reflect here is kind of the international nature of the law enforcement effort behind it. One of the things that is important to understand in the context of the dark web is that a lot of the server infrastructure, like if you think about that image we saw with Europe and the United States, a lot of the server infrastructure or relays or whatever you want to call them, these are run, all over the world, and they require local law enforcement to be engaged if there's something to be done on those systems. And that's why you see this sort of coordinated work. The top image, I think, is actually just, I liked it a lot. This is the Dutch National Police, I believe it is, if I remember the font's a bit small for me. But it's a bit of a call out to cyber criminals by the police force, asking them, how good is your OPSEC, your operational security, really? Which is hilarious and awesome, frankly. But how a cyber criminal is caught in the context of their dark web operations is largely because the cyber criminal has made a mistake in their operational security, meaning they've given away some detail about what they're doing or who they are that allows law enforcement or some investigation to connect them. And that's the call out here from the police force. And there's a list there you can see of a whole bunch of handles that you might have seen in the news over the years that have been arrested.
Yeah.
Interesting
Um,
space.
we have so I'm going to leave it to the end. There is a question that's come in sort of on the international side of it, but we'll leave that to the end. It just, ensure we have time here. So going through, like moving on to what's available, walk us through some of this stuff.
Okay, yeah. So this is really what we're worried about as IT pros trying to maintain network security. So, what is going on out there on the dark web? Basically, there are kind of two, well, there's more than two, but for our purposes, there are kind of three major trades. The first is about access. The second is about data. So the access has already happened and the data has been required. And the third is about the tools that allow one to do the access or manage the data, like encryption in the context of ransomware is a great example. So out on these marketplaces or forums or protected communities is frankly a better way of kind of looking at it. You're going to find all of these things. So access brokers are a term that you will bump into. These are people whose job it is to compromise an organization's network, gain a foothold in it that is persistent and can be accessed over and over again, and to maintain that access and then sell it to someone else. Usually, who they're selling that access to is usually it's a ransomware operator of some sort. And what that ransomware operator will do is take that access broker's access, use it to go into the network, and then they will propagate throughout the network from that initial access point. And they'll do that propagation using a bunch of other tools. Some of those tools they might have built on their own, some of them might be open source, and others they might have bought in that third category, where there's a whole bunch of development and effort going on and to exploit another kind of tool capability development. And they'll move from that initial access point throughout the network, and from there they will begin to either gather the data or encrypt it in place, depending on what their goals are. Now, in the context of markets, they are going to exfiltrate or steal that data because they want to sell it. And so they will take time, as much as they think they can get away with usually, to exfiltrate or siphon out as much data as they can, either from that initial access point or another one that they have subsequently created during their time on the network. And it's at that point where we move into the second bullet about data, and there's lots of it. Yes, there's terabytes of data available on the dark web. Most of it, I'm sure, is completely useless, but there's tons, medical records of people, there's all kinds of things out there. And so the second stage is about bringing that data into the threat actor's hand in a way that they can productize. And we'll see some examples of some of their like victim wall kind of posts that they do. But once they've got that data in their hands, they will encrypt what remains behind them. And this is where the extortion stage begins, and where, you're unfortunately, somebody gets a notification on their computer, a red banner pops up that says all of your data has been encrypted. Send money to this Bitcoin wallet, and we'll give you the decryptor. That's usually the pattern that leads us to these markets and leak sites. The examples that we have here, I think, are just some fun ones. The prison one is very recent. BBC News coverage of this just a few days ago. Apparently, there are the floor plans of a bunch of UK prisons that have been leaked on the dark web. So you can imagine that the story behind this would be that someone took it upon themselves. Either there were an insider who had access to it, or some remote attacker knew what department of the UK government might hold this data, or just more likely than not, they just fluked out and landed on it. But they were attacking the UK government in a way that led them to whatever department is responsible and holds this data. They found it, they grabbed it, and now it's on tour. So that pattern happens all the time. And I don't know if there was a data trade or exchange related to that. And they might have just done this kind of for the lulz, as they used to say, right? Just for the sake of doing it. But certainly that data could have been sold, I imagine. But you can imagine the types of data and what would be highly valuable. Our last bullet point here about intellectual property, I think, is a key one for IT professionals to be mindful of. So most of the time when we think about data breaches and leaks and these kinds of things, we're talking about PII, personally identifiable information, like our names, our phone numbers, our credit card numbers. And we're all naturally and very rightly concerned about those. But from a corporate perspective, our source code, our business plans, our customer lists, these things are worth incredible money. And frankly, that is the target of a lot of these gangs, and for exactly these reasons. They know that. And that intellectual property is the prize, the gems. Just very quickly, the last example we have there, under market 2, I think it is now down, transients being a big part of the dark web. But these markets, not only do they come and go, but they basically operate in very much the same set of patterns. So a threat actor will create a storefront on this market as though it were Spotify or Shopify or whatever, and they will sell their wares. I have compromised this company, this company, this company, this company. If you would like access to their networks, it costs this much. Ping me on Telegram here. And that's how it all begins and leads to, whatever the end game is. And that's a little peek.
You mentioned earlier that, sometimes, when they have the data and then they use these tools in order to, in order to take action on these things. How often, if at all, are hackers just sharing these tools out of the kindness of their hearts openly without asking for payment? Does that ever happen, or is it only pay to play?
It's a bit of a mixed bag. I would say there's a really robust affiliate economy, which is crazy, right? But there is a network of affiliates, a sort of a commercial structure that is based on buying in and taking part in that ecosystem. Over time, a lot of this stuff does eventually migrate into kind of, pardon me, a free space. And in fact, some of these tools that we're talking about, Cobalt Strike is an example. Some of these tools that are still in use today were actually leaked over time from other sources. And so they've become a part of the ecosystem of criminal tools, regardless of whether anybody was able to monetize them.
The community side of the dark web and just the hacker community in general, I find just absolutely fascinating, even from like a human behavior type
Me
of
too.
side. Anyway, I will let you get back to the slides here. So moving on.
Yes, right. We've kind of touched a little bit on some of this, but basically, in the context of the markets that we see and pay attention to on the dark web, there's a few different models, and these do change over time. Generally speaking, what a threat actor does, even before they engage with whatever infrastructure they might have in place on the dark web, meaning one of these victim websites, usually what they do is they reach out to whomever it is that they have just victimized. Sometimes that happens automatically by way of whatever the malware was. But they usually try and engage you directly, to extort a payment in return for a decryption key or whatever it is. Outside of that, on these markets, we see a whole bunch of different sales models. Direct sales, where the same package of data can be purchased by anybody who wants it. One-time sales, which I think this is about how much you trust the seller as to whether or not they're going to sell the same package of data to you and only you, or if they're then going to go turn around and sell to a bunch of people as well. But we also see auctions. There was a bit of a rise in the commonality of these. Whether that actually persists into the future is a little bit of a question for me. Not that everybody here is obsessed with dark web auctions, but yes, there is a rich economy of data trade in this context.
I do appreciate how much you're fighting the temptation just to give like a little bit of a 101 on how you should actually. So good restraint.
Yes.
Good restraint. All right, moving on. What is actually for sale on
Yeah, we'll do this one a little quicker. We've already talked about a lot of this, but it does make sense in terms of understanding the nature of the risks that we're trying to address when we think about the dark web, at least. Like we have talked about in the context of services for sale, everything under the sun. The biggest ones that I am mindful of as an IT professional with a security bent are uh, social engineering directed against an organization based on harvested data from wherever it might be, and how that gets packaged up and used. There's tons of services for sale for targeting people, companies, all of those kinds of things on the dark web, in addition to disruption services. If you have kids, here's a funny story. Many, many years ago, Saturday mornings, when Minecraft servers were like rising in usage as all the kids were getting online, there was like a ravenous trade in denial of service attacks amongst Minecraft server operators trying to knock other servers offline on Saturday morning so that users would join their servers, and you could follow some of that trading in the context of these hacking services, targeting Minecraft servers or whatever other gaming services as well. But the same applies to us, from a corporate perspective. Reputational attacks, all of these kinds of things are orchestrated and in fact kind of for sale in the context of the dark web.
90s, just so it's clear for me, Saturday mornings were really all about X-Men and Spider-Man rather
Yeah.
than Minecraft. I come from that generation, but I definitely know my daughter on the my daughter leans into the latter category. All right. So now, and again, we sort of, have talked about this a little bit, but just sort of, the opportunity to dive into it a little bit more.
Yeah, I guess really what I wanted everybody to take away here is the the way that the dark web facilitates the organization of whatever the endeavor is. We're talking about hacking, we're talking about cybercrime. And it provides a degree of anonymity. It provides a degree of reliability if you're a bad actor. And you can avoid prying eyes to a certain degree. If you were organizing an attack on Twitter, it will be quite obvious to those who are paying attention to Twitter what you're up to, or certainly after the fact, they could piece a lot of that together. This is why these communities exist on the dark web, to try and avoid as much of that. There's almost always a crossover into the real world or the surface web, so to speak, particularly as we mentioned already in the context of hacktivist activity, which I very strongly suspect will see an increasing. We've already seen a rise of it, a rise in it over the years. But I think we'll see an increase in that as well. And the dark web will play a role there.
All right. Getting into the favorite topic of ransomware gangs.
Right. So yes, coming toward kind of the the pointy end here, ransomware gangs are probably the biggest big ticket interest item most people have on their minds when they're talking about or asking about the dark web. And really, this is where a lot of these gangs, I shouldn't say got their start. Obviously, they got their start elsewhere, but they really first emerged on the dark web as players in the space who would shame a victim, right? They would post their name, they would say how much of their data they stole, and they would give a sample of it. And they would put that on these Tor websites. They have surface websites as well, occasionally. These are frequently taken down quite rapidly, which is why these Tor websites are an important like backup, frankly, or maybe they're the primary site for these gangs. But what you see here is one example. I just wanted to give you a real world look at what it actually looks like. So here we have in the image above, this is the Everest ransomware gang. They were active early in 2024, probably still active now. Stizzy.com, one of their victims, and Concord Orthopedics is another one of their victims. If we were to scroll down this website, we would see the list of many other companies that they have apparently compromised. And each of these cards or fields on their website is a hyperlink to what you see in the second image, which is a sample and summary of the data that they claim to have in their possession as a result of that compromise. So in the image you see below there, they are saying that they have some number of personal records, 400 and some thousand, and there is a counter running right now, 12 days and some number of hours. This is all extortion machinery, wherein they are trying to put pressure on the victim, Stizzy.com, saying, we have your data, and in 12 days and whatever, we're going to publish it all on the internet, unless you do whatever the thing is. Pay us the money is usually what it is. And in this context here, you can see we've got an example record they've posted. It appears to be the interface into like some admin panel that the threat actor has gained access to that's showing client records of some sort, like purchasing data. And as you scroll down this page, you can see more examples that the threat actor purports to have gained. This pattern is followed, I shouldn't say every time, but almost every time by these operators. So gain access in the way we just described, whether that's through an initial access broker or some other mechanism, propagate through the network, find data, exfiltrate it if they care to. Many of them still do. Encrypt what remains, or encrypt it all while you walk out the door, and now you have a big package of the stolen company's data that you can bring to the dark web and apply pressure to that company from an extortion perspective, and depending on what you're up to, sell to others as well.
Yeah, and you have a couple of other sort of headline examples here of ransomware.
Yeah, this one I wanted to just put out here. It's got a Canadian angle that hits home for many of us. And healthcare providers, healthcare organizations in the last couple of years have taken a real beating from ransomware gangs. If anyone is interested, a quick survey of the news via Google or whatever will find many examples of healthcare providers being targeted by ransomware gangs. And again, the pattern is very much what we have described before. And here you can see this is exactly what it really kind of looks like, I guess. So on the right, we have the ransomware operator's website. This is exactly the same format as you saw in the previous slide from Everest Group. I can't remember what this gang's name is, but here you can see Blue Water Health. They have 3 sample files available. If you download those, which I have not, they purport to be sample packages of the health records that they exfiltrated from the hospital. And at the bottom of the record there, they claim to have sold the whole package of data. There are some samples of this data, screenshots that have floated around, and it appears to be exactly what they claim it is. Photos of like URI if we had visited the health facility, and the name of the treatment and those sorts of things. Yeah, that kind of data, obviously, given its sensitivity, is incredible leverage for a threat actor like this to have. And basically, the vehicle by which they apply this leverage to their victim is to point them to this Tor website or their Surface website for as long as it remains active, and say to them, we've got your data, and we've already given samples to anybody on the dark web who wants it. and we're going to sell it in 12 days unless you pay us whatever we are demanding. And anyway, and so that pattern repeats over and over and over again. And I guess in practical terms, on the dark web, that's what it actually looks like on the right.
And this is interesting because this is another way that I find the community fascinating, because there are definitely some ransomware gangs that, for whom attacking healthcare facilities and hospitals and schools is sort of, forbidden. It's considered below the belt. And I know there was one last year maybe where like the ransomware gang like outed their sub gang. I don't know what it was, but
Yeah,
like
the affiliate.
yeah, the affiliate. Thank you, because
Yes.
it was like, nope, this is not what we stand for. So again, so interesting. this whole community on there. I cannot get enough. I think we're coming off as a little bit weird. You keep talking about how fun it is, and I keep talking about how fascinating it is. It's hard not to be kind of like sucked in to the sort of the, I don't know, the as
It's the same thing as enjoying true crime. That's
yeah,
the same.
there you go. Okay, so we did promise to wrap things up with a little bit of, what can you do? What are some things out there? And we'll certainly walk you through like how we can help you, and just sort of some best practices here. So first, and Earl and I did a webinar on risk and vulnerability management a little while ago, and really it's a little bit rinse and repeat, right? Like awareness, identification, knowing, visibility, those are sort of those repeating words. And it really, comes down to that. So, if your data is on the dark web, it does mean that it has been compromised. And Earl, I apologize because I'm totally stealing the line that you gave me in the lead up to this one, but you said you were going to say it. So I'm going to throw it out there and then you can add to it. But sometimes there's a saying that if you're not paying for something with money, you're paying for it with data, right? So there's so many apps and interactions that we have where we're handing over our data, and 99 times out of 100 it's a fully legit, it's with fully legit intentions. But it doesn't, data leaks, it doesn't just happen because your walls have been breached, right? It can be any number of these other places where your information lives. So it's not just about protecting around you. It's sort of, you really do have to kind of be aware as to what is out there, and that does take like the ability to monitor where those pieces of information are being shared. Anything to add, Earl?
No, that's really got it. I think it's fairly safe to say that for most of us, the way that we will be impacted by what we're talking about today is when it happens to someone else who's holding our data. And this is the situation that most of us experience in our personal lives. If our credit card number has been compromised, that's a very simple example of this. But yes, particularly in a business-to-business world, where all kinds of information is shared, both transactionally and in an automated context as well. This information is very frequently in places that we don't even realize until it shows up someplace where we know it ought not to be.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll walk you through a little bit what it is that we do here. Earl, I'll let you walk through this
Yep.
slide. This is sort of your DNA a little bit here.
Yeah, just very quickly for everyone, a big part of what we do is thread together data points in the context of our service. So, not endpoint cloud, all of these kinds of things, but we have a really robust threat intelligence program, and we have a really robust dark web monitoring program, which gives us tremendous insight into many of those areas at the bottom of the iceberg that we talked about earlier, wherein exposed information might be traded or even just dumped, which does happen quite a bit. So the combination of these two works together to give you not only the most robust perspective into this, but really to cover the primary concern, which is when your data ends up out of your control and then further out of your control, right? You've used a partner, a vendor, whatever. The partner, the vendor, whatever is compromised by a threat actor, and now your data is way out there in the threat actor's hands. It's only through this sort of insight that you can keep an eye on that, frankly.
Yeah, perfect. So one of the things that we offer our clients is dark web monitoring. And so it's, like we're out there monitoring these sort of, thousands of sites for all different kinds of information, often financial, business creds, your, personally identifiable information, and they're trying to gather as much as they can to sort of, triangulate into an individual, all that kind of stuff. So doing all of that monitoring and then making that, easy for you to consume and deal with. So it's like, hey, here's what's found. One thing that I always mention, because there is a little bit of, sometimes pain or frustration, I guess, that's associated to dark web monitoring, is that it can be a little bit like noisy. Like, oh my God, I know about that leak from 5 years ago. I've changed my password 3 times since then. Like, I've covered my tracks. And so really focusing in on the new, and the data of relevance here. But in addition to sort of the MDR, offering here, this is sort of an additional, peek under the covers, looking into the dark web monitoring. It can be, another indicator of threat, and that sort of, soon as possible, and reduce risk. And this is, options to do this on a monthly basis or on a daily basis, and have sort of like that instant alert when you're seeing that. So flexibility there. The way that we report back to you, this again kind of leads, like, is very much related to that risk management and vulnerability management. Is like, there is the doing of it, and then there's the ability to do something about it, which is equally important, right? So what we make sure that we're providing is like really straightforward reporting of like, this is what was found, this is how these are the sort of the basic steps to protect yourself from this. And what is your sort of your, like, risk level as it relates to what is found. And everyone's hoping that on a month-to-month basis or a day-to-day basis this is zero, right? But when it isn't, you do want to know, and you want to know what you need to do to to address it. And our folks are always available if you're not sure what you're seeing here and you have questions and that kind of thing. Earl, anything to add there?
I guess the only things I would highlight about our dark web monitoring, which I really enjoy, frankly, is that, as you'll see in the example here, there's a list of what are called clear text passwords as an example in this reporting. And these are the sorts of artifacts, or data points that do turn up in these exchanges on marketplaces, dumps, and all those kinds of things. Passwords, hash passwords, credit card numbers, phone numbers, all that kinds of thing. And so knowing what has been exposed in this context, as an example, gives you the ability to take like the most direct mitigation step that you would need to, and then hopefully to kind of like absolve yourself of worrying much more about it going forward. But it is great insight to have, and peace of mind to know what type of data. There's a big difference between a hash password being exposed and a clear text password being exposed.
For sure.
As many know. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's, again, like, as much context around the findings, as possible. Okay, so Earl, I'm going to throw this one back to you as well, for the most part, but sort of walking back to, like, so we've kind of walked through what it is, what you find, who's on there, how they're interacting, what you can do. But just want to leave you with, like, things to just, like, don't forget the best practices. I know how to change a slide. 1 second, boom, nailed it. Don't be sort of like tips and tricks of, things, just best practices that we should all be doing in our sort of day-to-day lives to reduce the risk, as much as possible.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, as it relates to the bulk of the types of risks that materialize on the dark web, what we've got here is a short list that helps out. So account protections like MFA, the value of that can't be overstated. The mixing, or rather the non-mixing of what is corporate and personal, is critically important as well. And the strength and non-reuse of passwords are well, is absolutely essential, frankly. One of the patterns that follows in every one of these breach scenarios basically is an automated attempt to access whatever accounts are at play using whatever lists of passwords have been made available. And so reusing passwords is a disaster these days. And then, of course, having some degree of monitoring around unusual activity, whether it's account related or device related. This would also apply in the context of your endpoint device, browser activity, as an example. And then ensuring that you have business processes. The context that always comes to my mind is ensuring that your financial transactions can't easily be intercepted or redirected by way of some business process as opposed to simple automations. So this might be invoking a phone call when someone asks to change an account number, as a simple example.
Yep. Oh shoot, I was going to say something. Oh yes, on the complex passwords, because that one's tough, right? And so again, there are solutions out there, like use one of those password managers, because it is very difficult to ask all of us to remember these 300 complex, all unique passwords. So just make use of the tools that are out there to help you on these fronts for sure. And that is all we had for today. Earl, there were a couple of questions that came in. I think you actually answered most of them. They were coming in early, but one of them, this one of them came in that I know you kind of answered towards the end there. But maybe just like a quick summary of this one. So someone asked, is any of the field effect research based on discoveries found in the dark web? So maybe just like a quick summary of what you were kind of walking through there in terms of the research that we're doing.
Oh, yes. Okay. So in the past, we've had a variety of different research or investigation kind of avenues in the context of the dark web. A lot of them relate to incident response work, the investigation of a particular incident or the exposure of data. That's a very common pattern, as well as what we would call OSINT or open source intelligence investigations that take us on to the dark web. In particular, those have involved, like fraud is by far the most common. Blackmail is another line of work practiced on the dark web. A lot of work has taken us down some of those avenues. At scale, the large scale processing of information, of data points is really the key in this context.
Yeah. Okay. One of them was, and actually it's funny because this question came in very early, but then you did mention this app. So is the messaging app Telegram considered dark web?
Yeah, I mean, okay, we're into a little bit of a definitions or semantic space in this regard. How one defines dark web is key. I would say yes, because really how I define dark web is any online space that requires like a degree of know-how to access it, and then a degree of um, like an account or a persona is maybe a way of putting it. And when I say persona, what I mean by that is, if you're going to engage, we're getting into a little bit of how to, sorry, Libby, but like, to engage in a cybercrime forum, one must know the lingo, be able to build a reputation, be invited into side conversations and those sorts of things. And that might begin on a dark web forum, a Tor, a .onion forum. And then from a forum chat, you might be invited to a Telegram channel, and you will then move into your Telegram app and carry on whatever it is you were talking about over there. So yes, same umbrella for me.
Yeah, perfect. I think we'll probably wrap it up. Yeah, well, let's wrap it up there. We're at the top of the hour. Thank you as always for story time with Earl. It's always my favorite my favorite part of the week. Thanks everyone for joining and sticking with us, and hope everyone has a great rest of day. Bye, y'all.